Hi, Michael King here again today from the Cosmosis Mentoring Centre. Today I'd like to share some understanding about spiritual abuse. It's something that not many people talk about. Sadly, the clarity and the ethics within most spiritual New Age and also many religious communities are appalling from my experience. A blind eye is so often turned to harmful behaviour, and worse, it's justified as some high-level code which is beyond the understanding of lesser mortals. Spiritual abuse is the manipulation and exploitation of others by the misuse of spiritual privilege and power. By definition, the majority of those who perpetrate such abuse are office holders in churches, New Age organisations and religious institutions. Instances of spiritual abuse can range from a one-off event, innocently committed by a single well-meaning church or spiritual group leader, to an intentional abusive culture involving the entire leadership. The act can be as obvious as a public breach of confidentiality, or as private as subtle pressure to give financially beyond your financial means. Although spiritual abuse is common within Orthodox religiosity, it is absolutely rampant within the New Age community. So how do you recognise spiritual abuse? Spiritual abuse shares many common features with other abusive systems, and they have their four unspoken rules. Namely, don't doubt, don't talk, don't think, and don't question. Let's talk about the don't doubt rule. The power wielded by abusive leadership stems from the premise that they alone are God's anointed, and that their biblical or scriptural interpretations or spiritual teachings alone are to be trusted. No one else is to be trusted. Any interpretation or information that does not receive their endorsement is untrustworthy. And the don't doubt rule squashes the individual's confidence in their own judgment and their ability to make decisions for themselves. Any personal experience that contradicts the leadership's teachings is also deemed untrustworthy and an indicator of spiritual immaturity. So it's like every other doctrine is looked down upon. Now there's a fine line here in that any genuine spiritual development process will have other ideas and behaviours which will be mutually exclusive to the success of that teaching. Just like a champion athlete probably shouldn't smoke cigars, so will any self-development path include an understanding of what must be avoided if you want to be successful with that path. These teachings, however, need to make sense and be reasonable. An alcoholic may not think it's reasonable to avoid alcohol, yet any sincere seeker of spiritual truth understands that ingesting any substance which reduces the soul's ability to control its vehicle is not wise. Now on to the don't think rule. Leaders of closed systems do not tolerate the study and consideration of alternative interpretations and viewpoints of other spiritual teachings. Their viewpoints are considered unquestionable truth. This closed mindset often extends to edicts on personal life, clothing, occupation, location, and even marital choices. Independent thinking, particularly any close analysis of your group's belief system, is considered a sign of dissension and disloyalty in these dysfunctional groups. While it's certainly true that it's difficult to make a stew and a pudding in the same pot at the same time, meaning that there's some wisdom in not combining a bunch of spiritual practices all sort of higgledy-piggledy from all over the place, the study of comparative theologies is an important part of spiritual personal growth, and I believe that it should be encouraged with anyone who's serious about the spiritual path. Now the don't talk rule. In abusive systems, any discussion of group issues with non-members is discouraged. The leadership will not tolerate outside consultation since it could expose the membership to alternative solutions and undermine the leadership's authority. Often current members are forbidden to talk to or about former members, unless it is to report on their subsequent shame and demise. Former members with relatives still involved in the church or group may be reluctant to talk about their experiences for fear of reprisal. In some groups, members are commanded to sever communication with non-member relatives and to adopt the group as their new family. From my perspective, your day-to-day life is the context within which you express your growing self-mastery. Any genuine personal spiritual development path should enhance your life rather than cut you off from it. Now, having said that, if you want to succeed on any spiritual path, it may not be wise to hang around with a bunch of substance abusers or self-obsessed hedonists. So as with all things, it's about moderation and wisdom. And lastly, the don't question rule. Abusive leadership will not tolerate challenges to its authority. Don't question is a powerful rule. The member who questions the decisions or standards of the leadership is usually ostracised, humiliated, or excluded from leadership opportunities in that spiritual group. I have met with many individuals and couples who have experienced such treatment when they question leadership in their church or spiritual group. I believe that discernment is vital if one truly is on the path towards self-realisation and self-mastery. While it's true that some things have to be taken on faith until you have the wisdom of hindsight that comes from personal experience, the practices and behaviours need to be reasonable and also have a demonstrated history of success. As I have said, there are some very fine lines here, and that's what abusive leadership exploits. In over 20 years of my experience in counselling, coaching and mentoring in the field of personal spiritual growth, I have many times had to ask people to leave groups that I am facilitating. Now, this was because they were disruptive, unwilling to deal with their issues honestly, and really just generally uncoachable. It was all about attention seeking for them. So for the higher good of the group, I encouraged them to leave because their attention seeking caused a disproportionate amount of energy to be wasted on them. That's a different phenomenon. In short, they were not really ready for the level of personal development that we were doing and that everyone else was ready for. I know that any of you who have ever facilitated group therapy work will know that feeling of wishing someone would not come to the group next week. Some of those people, you know, have since become very successfully involved with our work. However, most of them, God love them, are still out there telling everyone that will listen that I'm a terrible person who shunned them for no reason. That is as it is. You have to be discerning when you meet these kind of people. Most of them are easy to spot because they usually belong to the I am the greatest master that has ever lived brigade, and they attack anyone that tends to disagree with them and tell them that they actually need to work on themselves and they're full of self-aggrandizement. Anyway, that's the joys of working in the field of personal growth. Okay, let's talk about the characteristics of the spiritual abuser. The leaders of abusive spiritual systems share a common profile. They need to control, they have a very authoritative style, they have a commanding charismatic personality, they have an inability to tolerate criticism or dissension, and they have a tendency to surround themselves with small, exclusive cliques of submissive groupie sort of style people. Often the leader is a self-styled Bible expert or New Age guru whose subjective interpretations of Scripture and contemporary spiritual teachings appeal to the members as they justify unethical and immoral behaviours or permissive behaviours and thus reinforce the leader's anointed position. Rarely do these interpretations survive close scrutiny, but even so, such criticism of their teaching is perceived as persecution. Given the choice, the senior membership invariably remains with the besieged leader, lest they risk having to face the reality that they were tricked and are fools, and or they lose the privileges associated with the unethical lifestyle of the group. Abusive leaders are also quite secretive. Rarely are their financial affairs and family life subjected to the same scrutiny as those of their membership. The demands made on others are not made on self. Spiritually abusive leadership seems to flourish in environments with the following characteristics. Earnest seekers of truth who are emotionally wounded. When there's a kind of a biblically diluted established church or a new age group with a very sexually permissive culture. A philosophy which encourages exclusive feelings of specialness or greatness. Little or no emphasis on the importance of high ethics and work towards psychological clarity and purity of intention. Accreditation by the group as being one of the chosen or being a high-level master something or other simply by being part of the group with no work involved. And a society that seems to have lost its spiritual and moral way, and that's certainly the Western society we live in. In such cases, the resulting spiritual vacuum is filled by leadership that offers a sense of authority and a security not found elsewhere. That strong sense of belonging makes the abuse tolerable. To lose that is to return to insecurity, and this is what's played upon by these abusive leaders. Now, what's the path through spiritual abuse? Survivors of spiritual abuse recount how they were left with deep personal issues, particularly an inability to trust. Because critical thinking was discouraged, they had no confidence in their own ability to discern truth from error. This leads to feelings of guilt and shame, which now present a barrier to your relationship with Source. Survivors also struggle with the concept of unconditional acceptance and self-worth. Most spiritually abusive systems are very performance-oriented. God's pleasure depends on submission to the church or group's edicts and the total acceptance of the leadership's authority. This leads many survivors with a relationship with God, Source, which is based on fear and performance. Grace and unconditional acceptance are ideas that were spoken of but really never experienced in these sort of groups. This lack of trust and confidence also impairs the members' marital, family and social relationships. It is difficult to share closely with a relative when issues of group loyalty are at stake, or to accept another as a brother or sister when they have been labelled with no uncertainty as an untrustworthy non-believer. Now, I want to add an important note here. It is important to understand that when one embarks upon a genuine spiritual path of some kind, people may think and call you crazy, when all you're really doing is losing your attachments to material things and no longer working to become the richest person in the graveyard. So discernment is necessary. There is a difference between genuine concern from those around you and them simply attacking something that they don't understand or are not yet ready for. Discernment necessary once again. A lack of self-confidence will impair most attempts to achieve or take a risk in life, and a diet of performance-based acceptance will make most people vulnerable to emotional and physical burnout as they strive to gain approval. For the survivor of spiritual abuse, recovery is often long and arduous. Spiritual abuse is no exception. The survivor, having exited the system, needs to begin by openly challenging those 4 rules by trusting, talking, thinking and questioning. This is so they start to develop confidence in themselves again. Healing often begins with confronting and dismantling the rules that govern the group. This needs to be done in a safe and confidential setting, and the survivor has to find someone they can trust to work with. A neutral therapist is a good place to start. If you contact me, I can probably recommend one of our Cosmosis mentoring team, which includes counsellors, qualified coaches, psychologists, natural health practitioners and a medical doctor. By talking about their experiences and expressing the strong emotions that they feel, the survivor will discover that they hold the leadership and the hold that they felt the group had on them will begin to weaken. Processing the fears and guilt associated with their exit will require sound counsel and caring, accepting friends, or a transparent and accountable support group. Once the grief over exiting has been resolved, the survivor needs to immerse themselves in new patterns of relating and living based on developing a healthy relationship with creative source in some way. Everyone that works with me adheres to a very strict code of ethics, and you can view that code of ethics on our website. I can't emphasise highly enough the need for vigilance and discernment. Churchgoers, even in mainstream churches, and members of New Age groups need to be alert to the signs of spiritual abuse. Are their leaders open and accountable? Do they encourage critical thinking? Will they willingly consider new ideas and initiatives? Can they tolerate a diversity of opinion and interpretation? Are they tolerant to alternative spiritual faiths and ideas? Any hint of spiritual abuse needs to be addressed through all the appropriate channels. This involves confronting the abuser in increasingly more public arenas until, as a last resort, the relationship with the group must be terminated if nothing else works to resolve the issue. If the local church or group leadership is part of the problem, most denominations have large New Age groups have a grievance procedure that should be followed. But if the leadership is not accountable to some kind of higher authority, then the members need to question the rules and talk out and challenge as often as they can. If you feel there's no acceptable response, move away from the group. Find a group that is healthy and focus on your own healing. Abusive leadership maintains its power and privilege by breeding fear and guilt and rewarding loyalty. Dissension and exposure are what they fear most. Sadly, sexual abuse is very common in spiritual groups. I personally am astounded by the level of sexual misconduct in so-called spiritual organisations. Almost every religion and spiritual group I have ever had dealings with at least sometimes turns a blind eye and in some cases actively supports and encourages a culture of spiritual and/or spiritual sexual abuse. Many New Age teachers I have met routinely have sex with clients and students in the name of sexual healing, and almost all of them, although they are great on the stage, when they're not channeling, they certainly do not walk the talk in their day-to-day life. I'd like to share a typical scenario with you. Now, this is a true story and one of hundreds such stories I have heard from friends and clients. Imagine for a moment that you are an earnest, sincere young woman joining a spiritual group, all excited about your spiritual awakening. You read the books, you go to classes, meetings and service days, you tithe your money, you do everything that's asked of you. You are not informed, however, that the guru, leader of the group, to whom you are pledging your allegiance, time, money, heart and soul, conducts orgies and has sex with his students. You work very hard, you study hard, you try hard. Your devotion increases. You advance in the organisation. One amazing day you are called into the presence of the Master. You can hardly believe your incredible luck. You are getting something that is the fondest desire of nearly everyone in your little world. You prepare yourself as best you can for this great honour. You seriously and reverently, perhaps with some trepidation, you enter the Master's personal residence. You are in a place that you have never been before. You're nervous, of course you are. You are given some instructions about how to behave by one of the inner circle devotees. They are beaming at you. You feel like you've won the jackpot. You hope that you will not disgrace yourself. You are ushered into his presence. His closest devotees are all there. The ones that decide what level of practice you can be in and whether you can go to celebrations. They have a lot of control over your place in the pecking order of your little spiritual group. They're all smiling, and they're all in very intense, blissful, serious, and laughing at the Master's jokes. There's an overwhelming feeling of intensity and Shakti, spiritual energy, in the room. There are flowers and incense, works of art and beautiful objects all around you. A bottle of whiskey is going around. You've been eating a raw diet for 2 weeks, along with the rest of the lay members, and you have a passing thought about how your body is going to cope with this alcohol, but you trust these people, so you down a glass of it. You're not about to chicken out now. You have come for the instruction. You will be one who can stand in the fire. The party goes on. The drinking goes on. The stories and the laughter goes on. The Master is very attentive towards you. He's getting into your emotional issues. You are doing your best to surrender to it all and be very spiritual. He's telling you that you are very sexually wounded because of your relationship with your father. He offers to help. He's very specific, and what he says makes perfect sense. He knows where the hurt is. He tells you that you're stuck in your spiritual development process and you must go through this obstruction in order to progress. He will help you. Everything you have been doing for the last few years has been leading to this. You believe everything he says to you. You surrender all your resistance and ignore your alarm bells going off, and you allow the guru to have anal sex with you in front of his senior followers. You are later debriefed by an inner circle devotee who tells you that for the Master's safety this must be kept secret because normal people wouldn't understand. You go home and you are profoundly disoriented, but you believe that you've been given a great spiritual gift. You tell no one what has occurred, but you are very disturbed and confused by it, understandably. When someone in a position of authority over another uses that relationship to get sex, that is an offence punishable by law. Ask Bill Clinton, or any number of therapists or priests. That was not consensual sex. This is abuse of power. Consensual sex takes place between equals. This kind of unethical behaviour is rampant in the New Age community. I am amazed at how many New Age teachers, authors and healers travel the world having sex all over the place and convincing their victims that they are receiving a great spiritual gift. These deluded individuals actually believe their own bullshit. You have to wake up, people, and you have to be discerning. I personally have met many such individuals who believe that they are doing God's work and healing women or men all over the world by using their position to seduce people in their travels. Their behaviour is despicable, and sadly they give genuine teachers a bad name. The real problem here is the abuse of power. Some people seem to think this issue of spiritual sexual abuse is really about sex. Actually, it's about power. Sex is a matter of great vulnerability for many of us, and it's safe to say, particularly for women. But the issue is primarily one of power. What makes us different here at the Cosmosis Mentoring Centre is we have a very, very stringent code of ethics, and a grievance process in place. The personal spiritual development circles that we run adhere to this very strict code of ethics, which you can read on our website, where we really are more like a family, and we have many professionally qualified members in our group who can offer professional assistance to you if you have been a victim of spiritual or spiritual sexual abuse. Know that you are not alone. We hope to meet you soon at a Cosmosis transformational event. And welcome home.